Shri Sharad Javli. A big round of applause for our chief guest, Shri Sharad Javli. Please welcome to the 9th G.S. Visveswara Memorial Lecture. We are very happy that you have come in large numbers. We are very happy that Shri Sharad Javli has accepted our invitation and come from Delhi. Thank you, sir. Shri Sharad Javli was born in 1939, had his school education at K.E. Board's High School, Dharwad, and Mayo College, Ajmer, under the well-known headmasters S.G. Nadgir at Dharwad and Jack Gibson at Ajmer. He graduated from St. Joseph's College, Bangalore in 1959 and obtained the law degree in 1961 from the Government Law College, Bangalore. He was enrolled as an advocate in 1962. He had initial guidance of his late grandfather, Dr. D.C. Paute, architect of the Karnataka University and late governor of Punjab. Shri Javli initiated law practice working with his late father, Shri S.C. Javli, senior advocate in the Mysore High Court. He moved to the Supreme Court in July 1964. He was a pupil under late S.V. Gupte, then Solicitor General and later Attorney General and a reputed author of Hindu law. Late B. Sen, who had been at the Supreme Court since its inception, said in his autobiography, "Another person who used to work with Gupte, S.S. Javli, was extremely industrious, sound in law, and an embodiment of old world traditions." Shri Javli was designated senior counsel by the Supreme Court in 1989. He has completed 50 years of law practice in 2012. Shri Javli experienced success in the profession through private causes representing institutions and individuals before the Supreme Court and High Courts in particular, Delhi and Karnataka. Over 4 decades, Shri Javli has been part of the teams representing Karnataka in interstate water disputes of the Krishna, Kaveri, Mahadai under eminent leaders M.K. Nambiar, Sachin Chaudhary, Fali Nariman, T. Krishna Rao, and Baira Reddy. Shri Javli was counsel for the commission before the Jain Commission of Inquiry concerning the assassination of Shri Rajiv Gandhi. Shri Javli served the Union Public Service Commission for recruitment in the Ministry of Law from 1974 to 1980. Was associated with the Rajasthan and Kashmir Public Service Commissions in selecting candidates to the state legislature. He has been a life member of the management of Mayo College, Ajmer, and previously of the Delhi Kannada School. Was a member of the Academic Council, National Law School of India, University, Bangalore. He has been a founder member of the D.C. Paute Foundation, Karnataka University, for the annual award of fellowships at Cambridge University. He has been a founder member of the annual S.C. Javli National Moot Court conducted by the Karnataka University. He has also donated a law library known as the S.C. Javli Legal Research Center at the Karnataka High Court Dharwad Bench. In March 2014, Shri Javli was awarded the honorary doctorate in law by the Karnataka University, has been honored by the Delhi Karnataka Sangha as a distinguished Delhi Kannadiga in 2012. 3 years later, the government of Karnataka at Delhi conferred honors on the Rajotsava Day. We welcome Shri Javli with a warm welcome and a warm round of applause. Also to be noted, his son, Mr. Kirit Javli, has passed his LLB honors from the University of Leeds and is a bar at law, is in legal practice in Delhi. We extend a warm welcome to Shri Sharad Javli and welcome him to kindly address us on the G.S. Visveswara Memorial Lecture.
authorities of the Gokhale Institute, Mr. Ramu, where is he? Ramu, who is effectively in charge of this institute. I am really honored, surrounded by portraits of leaders of bygone era, led by none less than Mahatma Gandhi. I pay respectful homage to the awe-inspiring personalities. It is a great feeling to be here at this historic place, and I learn that they are due to observe Amrit Mahotsava shortly. Thinking of Vishweshwara, it is nostalgic for me to recall college days and remember my late friend, G.S. Vishweshwara. He was among the leaders, student leaders of the day at Law College. He was a year senior, though. It's a privilege for me to participate in this memorial event this evening in his honor. He had displayed all his qualities to join the law career ahead. With application, devotion, and clear understanding, aided by his forthright personality. If I may say so, he was straight as a stick, to adopt an adage oft used. To say that he was a gentle human being would be an understatement, though enigmatic in the present climate of the country. Moot Court was a chance for me to observe how equipped Vishweshwara was for the profession. He was the public prosecutor, and I was fortunate to be his assistant. I recall his meticulous preparation for the event 58 years ago. It was a hobby for me those days to draw caricatures, to recall my events in the college, to while away time. It was difficult to be completely attentive in class. Vishweshwara had a close friend, Shyam Sundar. Peace be on both of them. While Shyam was tall, Vishweshwara was of medium height. I had drawn their combined caricature to the amusement of friends. One among them giving it a caption, long and short. It was included in a publication of caricatures attracting attention in college circles. After college, we changed places, with me going to Delhi. His career continued at Bangalore until, to the surprise of many, he opted for a judicial career. Maybe we thought that he would gain some confidence and satisfaction serving society from a judicial seat. Later, it was no surprise that he reverted to law practice. He excelled as a professional with sterling qualities. It did not take much time for him to be in the thick of practice. And as expected, he was designated a senior advocate in 2004. We occasionally met during the court vacation. Unfortunately, we lost him in his peak years. His son Chandrasekhar has been a colleague to us in Supreme Court. He has given a glimpse of his father's qualities, especially being forthright and persistent with the cause undertaken in court. It is indeed laudable that he has instituted this value-based program of memorial lecture in honor of his father. May I convey appreciation and respectful regards to the family of Vishweshwara. I have been asked to explain the Kaveri water dispute of its facts and law. It's a great opportunity for me to address this evening at a gathering of intellectuals, professionals, and many ardent supporters of the cause of Karnataka. It is a serious subject, though. In spite of association over 3 decades, I pause here. First, I visited the KRS Dam at Mysore in 1954, almost 64 years ago or so. Then we were part of the erstwhile state of Bombay, and I was a school student. I was so overcome by the spectacle of KRS and what was described as Brindavan Gardens. I still remember returning late in the evening after holding the view as long as I could, but turning backwards several times to look at the Brindavan Garden, for I thought we in Bombay would never have a chance to go to Kaveri again. Who knows, I should again come on a visit. Little did I imagine that 2 years later there was reorganization, and that I would today have the chance to explain the Kaveri dispute of all places in Bangalore. In spite of association, the task of presenting an abridged version of events within an hour marked for me is rather daunting. Maybe my presentation may also reflect a touch of bias for Karnataka. It has been an endeavor for me to overcome those thoughts. Thank you, Chandrasekhar and Mrs. Chandrasekhar, for welcoming, and the authorities of the Gokhale Institution. Now I go to the subject proper. Kaveri dispute, no, I must say that I must explain it so that there are so many non-advocates around, and it must not appear that I am speaking in a court or explaining law students in the college. So I have tried to put it in my words, so I would rather present it in that manner. Kaveri water dispute is a fascinating story spanning over 2 centuries of recent Indian history. It highlights the British rule and its political powers of paramountcy, as also the Maharaja's enlightened rule in Mysore, which was among the large princely states of our country, and the emerging unified democratic national rule after independence under the Constitution. It's a story of the earliest surge for irrigation development in southern states of the peninsular India. Mysore was one of a kind in the subcontinent to promote the principles of distribution of interstate river waters and of disputes resolution in the previous century, with hardly any experience in common law world. A few initial remarks on water and water rights may well be in order. Rivers and waters have been the bedrock of all civilizations. Surface water and groundwater are 2 forms. Irrigation facilities have been the central theme of India's agricultural development, as also the needs of growing cities for drinking water. Our Supreme Court has recognized that the right to use flowing water is publici juris and common to all states. In the presidential address, the presidential reference 1991, the court said, I quote, "Though the waters of an interstate river pass through the territories of the riparian states, such waters cannot be said to be located in any one state. They are in a state of flow, and no state can claim exclusive ownership of such waters," unquote. Even before independence, the states had developed awareness of river water use, water rights, and planning of projects for irrigation and power production. Kaveri and Tungabhadra, traversing Mysore and the then Madras were in the forefront. Mysore and the tank system, since before the 18th century, dotted by lakes over its area. Madras, on the other hand, had the benefit of groundwater potential, alternative to Kaveri supplies. Then came early in the previous century, Mettur Dam in Madras and the KRS in Mysore, both across the Kaveri, now due to observe their centenary by 2034. They were planned and accomplished decades before independence. Tungabhadra and Koyna were completed soon after independence. In fact, the shortage of river supply erupted as a major program for the governments at the center and states around the time of independence. Irrigation and agriculture continued to be state subjects from the time of Government of India Act 1935 to the Constitution of India 1950. The center, of course, coordinated matters of finance, planning, and technical approval as part of the national policy. The basic features of Kaveri may be stated. Would you like to? The river originates in the Brahmagiri range of the Western Ghats near Madikeri. From Coorg, it flows through Mysore and on to Madras. Coorg was previously a princely state and later a separate administrative unit as a commissionerate under the British rule and a Part C state under the Constitution of India until it became part of the new state of Mysore, 1956. I would like to show you the place of origin, Talakaveri. Birthplace, River Kaveri. Yeah. Early. May I continue? Before independence, I am now referring to Mysore, adjoining state, was under its Maharaja having treaty arrangements with the British government, subject to the overview of its resident. After independence, Mysore became a Part B state under the Constitution until 1956, and later as a new enlarged state with additional areas integrating under the States Reorganization Act, and thereafter equally placed with Tamil Nadu. The river further flows through Mekedatu before entering Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu was before independence the British province of Madras. It became a Part A state under the Constitution initially until 1953, when Andhra state was separated from its large territories. In 1956, Madras became Tamil Nadu. Thus, originally, Coorg was the upper state, Mysore the middle riparian, and Madras the lower riparian. After 1956, Mysore, now Karnataka, has been the upper riparian and Tamil Nadu the lower riparian, widely described as successors to the princely state of Mysore and the British province of Madras, though this has been the subject of quite some extent of arguments. The river joins the Bay of Bengal in Tamil Nadu. Presently, the length of the river, you may now know, because of the changes, Karnataka has 381 kilometers, whereas it extends to 357 kilometers in Madras. Kerala and Puducherry, with their portions in the basin area, have also interests in Kaveri waters. Map. That is Kodagu. That is the flow of the river. Tamil Nadu. That's Mettur. KRS is there. Then go down, border, and Mettur, then on to the Bay of Bengal. Kaveri is not a river of abundance. The waters are not adequate for the needs of 4 states. The extensive drought areas cannot all be served. The total yield of the river is now determined as 740 TMC. A TMC means 1,000 million cubic feet, good enough to irrigate 6,000 acres of rice cultivation or 15,000 acres of dry crops. Karnataka provides 392 TMC to the Kaveri waters, while Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry together account for 222 TMC. Kerala contributes 148 TMC. 63% of Karnataka's basin area is drought area. These are basic facts. Thus, the river length or the contribution of Kaveri waters or the basin area or the drought area in Karnataka all exceed those of Tamil Nadu. Karnataka receives rainfall from one monsoon, southwest, whereas Tamil Nadu has the benefit of 2 monsoons, southwest and northeast. Besides, it has additional source of ample groundwater potential of around 100 TMC. The Kaveri dispute now can be initiated. I would put it this way. The Kaveri dispute depicts the historic developments of the turmoil in Mysore for over 200 years and its conflict with the then British province of Madras. Major portion of Kaveri waters had been cornered historically by areas now in Tamil Nadu for geopolitical reasons by prior appropriation as a lower riparian. The area irrigated in Madras exceeded 16 lakh acres even prior to 1924, whereas Mysore had reached just around 3 lakhs. Mysore, until 19th century, depended on the tank system for its agriculture. Interestingly, the Kaveri water dispute originated and developed mainly or entirely during the period of British rule. This is material. Whatever dispute you call it regarding Kaveri, it is all related to the British rule. There was the increased awareness of mutual needs and rights arising from the inevitable expansion of agricultural operations and the realization of shortage in water supply. Could also be, maybe, there was progress in technology and irrigation engineering contributing, and besides, the early pronouncements of the US Supreme Court paved the way for principles for the distribution of interstate waters. Now I want to convey to you something that has struck me. What happens here? It is apposite to recall England's proud moment in history, handing down the great charter of Magna Carta in the rule of King John in 1215. It has been lauded the world over as an instrument for the protection of liberties and for justice or rights, symbolizing human values. It was especially intended to protect the subject from abuse of the royal prerogative. The Bill of Rights enshrined in the US Constitution of the 18th century reflected these considerations. In the words of Benjamin Cardozo, I quote, "Bills of rights give assurance to the individual of the preservation of his liberty. They do not define the liberty they promise." This was attributed to England and US. That means with a difference about 5 or 6 centuries. That is the hallmark of culture, I would say, not just law, culture. They grew up in that atmosphere, in that climate. Now see what Kaveri dispute is going to unfold for you. Ironically, the events of the Kaveri disputes demonstrated the British rule in the 19th century India and the exercise of paramount power as the antithesis of the principles of equality and liberty or of fair play. The British rule was all throughout marked by unequal treatment meted out to the two segments of the Kaveri basin, as will be unfolded hereafter. The British rule nurtured the Kaveri dispute. That's how I would say. It approved the use of excessive waters received in Madras from natural flow as the prescriptive rights of Madras, an expression thanks to the British. It was all, of course, detrimental to Mysore. Its rights and interests in the Kaveri were simply brushed away. It was an instance of classic contrast between the concepts of precept and practice. The first of the constitutional documents was the Government of India Act of 1858. This is a story which also highlights the British facility of language, one side, and of their contribution to the development of law on the other side. So they have done it all in good English. They have done it all in the name of law and coined those special expressions which should strike anyone among the professionals. The first of the constitutional documents. Madras was directly administered by His Majesty the Crown of England through the office of the Secretary of State in Council at London. Madras enjoyed its patronage. It reached such a stage that the British described it as British territory, and they went further. If water was not received in British territory, accusing Mysore to say that you are affecting the interests of the British villages. Such was their expression. The princely state of Mysore under its Maharaja was all along constricted by the suzerainty or paramountcy of the British Crown. Paradoxically, paramountcy remained an undefined expression of authority of the conqueror, exercised arbitrarily and indiscriminately. In Mysore, the British control was exercised through the office of resident located in Bangalore. In other words, it was Maharaja's territory, Maharaja's area, but the resident was located in Bangalore, providing the overview to the Maharaja's administration. Incidentally, Raj Bhavan today is presently a reminder of that office. To many of the old-timers, you will recognize that it was called residency earlier. Up to the 19th century, irrigation was based on the run of the river. Early stages would take us to the 19th century, after the princely state of Mysore was restored to the Maharaja following the defeat of Tipu. Mysore found the need for restoration of irrigation, certain works neglected during the faulty administration of Tipu Sultan in the aftermath of the dreadful famine of 1790. The cultivation of about 12,500 acres under the works undertaken by 1804 in Mysore had been less than the area cultivated prior to the War of 1798. Even so, the collector of Tanjore in the lower reaches of Madras under the British rule, conveyed grievances of the Madras government by protracted correspondence between 1804 and 1807. Madras objected to the works undertaken in Mysore, notwithstanding the cultivation of its own areas of over 10 lakh acres in the delta by the extravagant use of Kaveri flows. This was the initiation of an attitude of dispute through the 19th century. In 1831, the British government, there is a period I would like to convey how did the events take shape. In 1831, the British government superseded the administration of the Maharaja of Mysore under the treaty terms. Mysore was administered by the British rule during the next 50 years. Major Sankey was the chief engineer of Mysore in 1866. We are familiar with his name by the lake presently located in Sadasivanagar in Bangalore and the road named after him. He prepared the report on works proposed in Mysore without interfering with or affecting the vested interests in Madras. After all, he was a British officer. He worked for the welfare of Mysore. When in Mysore, they thought of the welfare of Mysore. But then, the government of India, 1872, indeed approved the scheme proposed by Colonel Sankey for the repair and regulation of tank system in Mysore. It was believed, now see the contrast. It was believed that Colonel Sankey was transferred to Madras after the conclusion of British administration in Mysore. Madras, however, later objected even to the progress of the approved works and utilization of Kaveri waters in Mysore, because by then it had revived as a Maharaja's territory. The British government involved the princely Mysore in a series of developments in the name of negotiations. In 1892, rules were drawn by the government known as, the title itself is interesting, rules defining the limits within which no new irrigation works are to be constructed by the Mysore state without the previous reference to the Madras government. They were described as rules. They could administer in whatever manner they liked. They called this a set of rules. But then, just see this, it was not a signed document. Yet, government of Madras considered it as a binding agreement. They called it an agreement. It was an agreement. That was the power of the paramountcy. This emerged as a landmark obstacle having its adverse effect over 100 years on the upper riparian Mysore and the state of Karnataka. In view of this agreement, Mysore required the previous consent to the Madras government in respect of any proposed construction of new irrigation reservoirs across the rivers named therein, including the Kaveri. It gave rise to further contentious developments over the next 2 to 3 decades, arising from the permission sought by Mysore to construct its KRS project. It is of interest that Mysore had to seek, and indeed sought, the consent of Mysore for the utilization of a meager quantity of 45 TMC under the proposed KRS dam out of the Kaveri waters of 740 TMC as presently determined. The whole river is flowing to Madras, and we wanted to construct a small project for 45 TMC. That was the contribution of Sir M.S. Vishwaraya, with all the remaining waters flowing down to Madras. Even then, Madras told it with fresh controversies and arbitration proceedings. Now see, Mysore, though successful in the arbitration of Justice Griffin, was compelled by the British hierarchy at the highest level to negotiate afresh. A regime of excess releases from the proposed KRS by limit flows assuring irrigation in Madras areas and demanded by it in the name of prescriptive rights as a condition precedent was imposed on Mysore in the form of the Agreement of 1924 for a period of 50 years. It could only draw waters from the KRS for its irrigation, subject to the assured releases to Madras. Now I'll explain these particulars in due course. Kaveri water dispute in my understanding, is unique. It has involved so many questions of law and of facts as no other water dispute in India. I'll give an idea, an overall view of how many aspects of dispute arose. It's a dispute involving the appreciation of events of the 19th and 20th centuries under the British rule and of the attempts made through over the 19th and 20th centuries to resolve the disputes. It's a dispute between the paramountcy and that of the rights of a princely state having the status of semi-sovereign state. It's a dispute involving a choice of the applicability of international law or common law or of the principles governing the rights and obligations of private riparian owners or of the present Indian law, may be aided by the pioneering pronouncements of the US Supreme Court, shaping the concept of equitable apportionment, especially in disputes between states of the same country. It's a dispute involving the claim to protection of excessive use of Kaveri waters, either inside the basin area or outside, though not based on the principles of equitable apportionment. That was the claim of Madras. It is a dispute involving questions of succession to the rights and obligations of the princely state of Mysore imposed by the paramountcy in the form of agreements of 1892 and 1924, brought about during the period prior to the Government of India Act 1935, and developments under the India Independence Act 1947, followed by the instrument of accession and merger of the princely state into the Indian Union, the commencement of the Constitution of India in 1950, and the enactments of the reorganization of states up to 1956, including the new state of Karnataka and the parliamentary enactments of the same year for the adjudication of interstate water disputes. We had to wait through all these developments. It's a dispute concerning the claim of Tamil Nadu for the enforcement of the pre-constitution agreements by a post-constitution tribunal and protected or created under the constitutional provisions of Article 262, and the claim of Karnataka to a division of the Kaveri waters without reference to the previous agreements. That was our case, but on the principles of equitable apportionment as settled by the Supreme Court of India. It was a dispute concerning the divesting of the rights of states to manage their water resources in favor of the Board of Management established under the scheme for implementing the final decision. It was a dispute which involved the question of Supreme Court entertaining appeals from the decision of a tribunal, also headed by a Supreme Court judge, constituted under this Interstate Water Disputes Act, and the Act declaring the decision of a tribunal as having the same force and effect as that of a decree of the Supreme Court. The Kaveri dispute refers to so many laws and administrative units that a student of law would gain an introduction to the developments over 2 centuries past. The main references at a glance included the laws of India governing contracts, arbitration, limitation, and the Code of Civil Procedure, Constitution of India including the formation and succession of states, and the powers of the tribunal and of the Supreme Court for adjudication of water disputes. The constitutional law developed by the Government of India Acts over a century before independence, the India Independence Act 1947, and the parliamentary enactments for the reorganization of states, including provisions for the succession of states and water uses, as also those of the adjudication of disputes. Articles 3, 131, 136, 262, 295, and 363 of the Constitution and their interpretation, as also the rules framed by the International Law Association at Helsinki in 1966, widely known as the Helsinki Rules of 1966, and so on, so forth. It goes on. I need not spend much time. I'm just giving you the gamut, the outside limits of all so many interaction of laws. The story hereafter in my understanding, is an absorbing saga of the race and progress in irrigation and agriculture in the respective states, with prosperity, though, more in one and less in the other. It depicts the domination of the British paramountcy over the rule of the princely state, though aware of its rights in waters flowing through its territories. It also records the innovation in law, technology, and irrigation engineering. The striking factor was the Madras claims, aided by British powers, consistently placing constraints on and belittling the aspirations of a less powerful princely state, treated as a feudatory and a vassal state, at all times subsidiary to the British interests. In Madras, references to the main developments in the uses of Kaveri waters and conflicts between the erstwhile states of Mysore and Madras would now be meaningful. First, the concept of paramountcy. I have tried to compose the description of paramountcy for all to understand whenever I said paramountcy, what did it convey? The British paramount power was the hallmark of its rule, as the iron fist keeping India in control and maintaining relations with a native state or a feudatory state, as it described, bereft of any trappings of sovereignty. It chose to reduce the position of a Maharaja to an ornamental head with regalia, medallion, and to the glitter of titles. The administration was controlled by a British resident stationed locally. Take the case of Mysore. The Maharaja was fully guided by the British paramount power. On the one hand, that was not all. With the exercise of paramountcy, there was also the British rule in Mysore too, though without bearing the responsibility for equal treatment of the inhabitants and institutions of the princely state on par with those of the British province of Madras. The unequal treatment was neither logical nor welfare-oriented, a rule of thumb or that of chancellor's foot. I say this with care because kindly see, you may put the Maharaja in a cage. He's already caged. All right. He is not effectively interfering. You have posted your resident in the state concerned. You are ruling. It is all British controlled. Then why treat the subjects differently? Why deny waters to Mysore and give more to the British province of Maharaja? What sin have they committed? If you want to control the Maharaja, keep him apart. But why? No, not only that. If you compare right up to reorganization, we have done so many cases under Section 115 of the States Reorganization. Those who came from integrated areas like Bombay Province has one such as Madras Province, heads of departments could draw up to 2,500. But in Mysore, it was 1,500. Any head of the department could not draw more than 1,500. And if I'm not mistaken, I have not got the actual information from my friend Vasant, even judges in the high courts drew less than the judges in the provincial high courts. I bet prior to independence, the salary structure in Mysore was around 2,500. After Constitution, it rose up to 3,000. After the Constitution and the States Reorganization Act, they were brought on par with the constitutional provision for 3,500. Why? Why this differentiation? In all branches, it was Maharaja's territory. They are located there. They are all citizens. They are serving in the same manner, but they are treated as Maharaja's subjects. And it continued all through up to 1956. Today, take a high court, be it in Sikkim or be it in Karnataka. Salary structure is the same. You don't, under the Indian Constitution, you don't distinguish. But under Magna Carta, those trained under Magna Carta, those who gave us constitutional documents like Government of India Act and the rest, they believed in treating the two separately. That is what has been striking in my study of paramountcy. And I hope I am able to convey to you. The British resident in Mysore stated as much in prescribing the limits within which Mysore was required to function. See this, I want to quote. The resident in Bangalore states this. Sir Oliver John also desires me to point out that he cannot accept the contention that Mysore has the right to utilize the fullest extent the natural watercourses flowing through its territory. In the first place, international law is not applicable to a feudatory state like Mysore in its dealings with the paramount power. The principle which should be taken as your guide, this is addressed to Mysore government, in this important question is that no scheme for stopping the flow of water from Mysore to Madras territory will be permitted if it can be shown to be detrimental to the interests of the latter, that's Madras. Now, at the beginning of 1892, Madras issued the order requiring Mysore to obtain its consent before any reservoir was constructed in Mysore area. In the event of disputes, it had to go to arbitration, or legal jargon. It should go to arbitration. Who would ever say that there was any unfairness in these provisions? Now, these developments culminated in the issue of rules described as agreement. But the rules were called as agreement, that we have concurred. Mysore, what concurrence could Mysore extend? It was an unsigned document. Today, would you call any unsigned document as an agreement? What laws are we administering? They are also derived from the British law of contract. Can you look at an unsigned document and say this is agreement? But the British called it an agreement. No, it was an unsigned document, yet it was looked upon by the British as a binding instrument. Clauses 2 to 4 governed as many as 15 streams flowing from the territory of Mysore downstream to Madras, including the Kaveri. Clause 4 required the previous consent of the Madras government for Mysore to build any new reservoirs. Rule 3 was the pivot. It was carefully worded as if for the mutual benefit, though in substance it was wholly detrimental to the interests of Mysore all along. It explained the procedure. I quote, when the Mysore government desires to construct any new irrigation reservoir or any new anicut requiring the previous consent of the Madras government under the last preceding rule, then full information regarding the proposed work shall be forwarded to the Madras government, and the consent of that government shall be obtained previous to the actual commencement of the work. In the event of differences between the governments of the two states, the dispute would be referred to the final decision either of arbitrators or of the government of India. I unquote. The language camouflaged the intention of keeping Mysore at the mercy of the government, the British government, while protecting and promoting the interests of Madras. How was that done? Just see. Mysore willy-nilly complied. On the 31st October 1910, Mysore proposed the construction of KRS Dam for storing a small quantity of 44 TMC for its irrigation requirements in the arid parts of Mysore and the power requirements of the KGF. It sought the consent of Madras in 1910. The protracted negotiations failed, even with Sir M. Vishwesvaraya participating on behalf of Mysore between 1901 and 10. A year later, Madras government, however, refused its consent. It was astounding that Madras was agreeable to the construction limited to a negligible quantity of 11 TMC. So 44 is too much. You could do with 11 TMC out of 740 TMC, the rest of the river flowing to Madras. So, the difference erupted. Mysore had no option but to consider arbitration. Government of India made a reference to a sitting judge, Justice Griffin of the High Court of Allahabad. In 1914, Justice Griffin submitted his award to the Government of India approving the right of Mysore. Look at the events. The judge held it right. Justice Griffin submitted his award to the Government of India, approving the right of Mysore for utilizing 44 TMC as claimed. He upheld. The award was ratified by the Government of India. That was also right. It was hoped that the ratification would mean final decision. Surprises were still in store. There could be no appeal and no further procedure after the arbitration award. Yet, the Government of Madras expressed that it was, I quote, unable to acquiesce in the decision of the Government of India. Madras says that it would not acquiesce in the decision of the Government of India and desired to submit the matter for the final orders of His Majesty's government and secured a reference to the Secretary of State for India at London. The response of the Secretary of State of India, the State for India, interestingly overlooked the principles of law. It appeared that the paramountcy would not be bound by the arbitration award, even if it was regular and proper. Appeal to the Secretary of State was regarded political and not judicial in character. What happens now? By an off-the-cuff pronouncement, finding substance in the appeal of Madras against the Griffin Award, approving the KRS project, Secretary of State for India advised Mysore, better renegotiate all over again. All the time and efforts of Mysore in securing a favorable award at arbitration stood defeated by a stroke of pen. Was it the message of paramountcy, of winning the heads for one and losing the tails for the other? First, Mysore was got involved in arbitration, perhaps hoping for its failure. After its success, though, the judicial award favoring Mysore was reduced to a knot by a contrived procedure misrepresented as appeal. All at the cost of Mysore and its aspirations. The rule of law was subverted. What could be a better example of the arbitrary power of paramountcy and of playing games with the fate of Mysore? Mysore was cornered, conscious of the loss of time in securing the consent for KRS and of enormous delay in the commencement of its construction, involving huge financial implications. That was 2 crores for Mysore in 1924. 2 crores. There has been correspondence that, wow, we are to expend such a huge quantity of 2 crores. Mysore was compelled to opt for fresh negotiations with Madras in order to accomplish the dream project to initiate an era of prosperity. The negotiations started afresh. The first step for Madras was to insist on abundant assured releases from the proposed KRS dam in Mysore, disproportionately excessive to its requirements by means of rules of regulation. They would always call them rules. And the requirement was not measured and determined. And look at the manner in which they described that requirement. Mysore suggested that wastage should at least be eliminated. Madras justified the wastages as unavoidable. Madras demanded a large volume of waters to flow in the months of June to January all through, and the place for measuring the releases was indicated as the Upper Anicut at the head of the delta region. The requirement of Madras was indeterminate. The Mysore releases were to be measured by the volume of flows, 6 feet up to 7.5 feet of water level in height, passing over the Upper Anicut in Madras, 440 kilometers away from KRS. It's mind-boggling to realize that the quantity of water for release from KRS dam could possibly have been much more, with transmission losses. To ensure the flow of specified quantity over Upper Anicut located a long distance, 440 kilometers downstream. So the quantity that you could measure of 6 feet or 7.5 feet was not all that we could release. We have to release more because that must be available at Upper Anicut. See? So Mysore could utilize the waters for its purposes, subject only to the releases of this assured quantity to Madras. This was described as agreement. Another precondition, Mysore was required also to agree to the construction of Mettur Dam in Madras on Kaveri, within a short distance from the border between the two states. Mettur was designed to utilize 90 TMC, twice the quantity that of Mysore for the KRS dam of 44 TMC. A covering agreement could materialize only after Mysore yielded to Madras, achieving its Mettur dam and the assured releases from the KRS for the delta cultivation. In other words, more than helping Mysore requirements in drought areas, KRS served to assure the flows for the delta cultivation in Madras. The outcome was the agreement dated 18th June 1924. It was signed by the Maharaja Krishnaraja Wadiyar of Mysore and Lord Willingdon, Governor of Madras. The ultimate seal of approval to the agreement of 1924 was given by a telegram of 18th June 1924 to the Viceroy of India from the Secretary of State for India at London. He had to approve. The rules governing the KRS releases to Madras did not initially take into account the possibility of obstruction by the Mettur Dam itself coming up in due course. After all, if the Mettur Dam came near Madras border, how could you measure 6 feet and 7.5 feet so far down at the Krishna Delta? Therefore, it became necessary to translate the releases measured by the volume of water flows over the upper Anicut, specifying the quantities to measure the assured releases from KRS. Let us prescribe the actual quantity to be released by KRS instead of waiting for measurement of 6 feet or 7.5 feet. It led to second arbitration headed by Justice Page. Look at the involvement, stage by stage, for everything. A sitting judge of the Calcutta High Court. Incidentally, there was an interesting aside in course of those proceedings. Madras was aware of the consequences of its unreasonable demand for disproportionately excessive releases from KRS. They were aware. Its plans to frustrate Mysore's project and its requirements were unwittingly exposed. Madras Counsel Sir Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer himself acknowledged, I quote, "In fact, the contention of Madras has always been that it was not possible and feasible to work the KRS project consistently with the rights of Madras," unquote. They said it as much, and they had the courage to say it firmly. The agreement of 1924 was a landmark believed to have concluded the dispute. Mysore could have the benefit of irrigation in parts of its districts, Mysore and Mandya, though large drought areas still remained unserved. Mysore's liberty to use Kaveri waters was curtailed by the assured flows to Madras. The agreement stipulated a period of 50 years for its operations. Now, I want to say something here. One may see the involved language to make the term of agreement for 50 years. It had Karnataka involved in the exercise of interpretation until the Supreme Court settled it recently as having expired in 1974. But the tribunal had succumbed. The Supreme Court had to set it right. Now, what is that clause? The clause said, the Mysore government and the Madras government further agree that the limitations and arrangements embodied in clauses 4 to 7, 4 to 8, supra, shall at the expiry of 50 years from the date of the execution of these presents be open to reconsideration. The two states could also open to reconsideration in the light of experience gained and of an examination of the possibilities of the further extension of irrigation within the territories of the respective governments, and to such modifications and additions as may be mutually agreed upon as a result of such reconsideration. It was difficult for the tribunal to say that this actually stipulated 50 years. There were other places to say that it could come to an end at 50 years. They got so involved in the several clauses, so described in these terms, that they said it has not expired. The two states could also utilize the water, so the tributaries in certain proportions that was separately provided in the same agreement. If Tamil Nadu used on its tributary to a certain extent, a portion of that could be also used by Mysore in its territories, on its tributaries. There is no correlation, but that's how they did. The two dams were completed in 1934. They had operated for a decade when India attained independence. Now, KRS Dam was constructed using a mortar known as Surki, possibly for the first time. It's called Surki Dam, as cement was not then manufactured in India. Surki mortar is a mixture of lime, Surki, and water. Would you like to show? I'll continue. The India Independence Act 1947. Oh, this goes to another subject. You show the KRS first. Sorry, Vishweshwaraya. Can I resume? That was KRS, and that lasted from 34 to 47 and 50. Now, these are the developments which are material. The India Independence Act 1947 was an enactment of the British Parliament. Two dominions, India and Pakistan, were created to become independent separate states. Section 7(1)(b) provided for the lapse of suzerainty of His Majesty over the Indian states, and with it all treaties and agreements in force at the date of passing of the Act between His Majesty and the rulers of Indian states. It is relevant to note that the consistent stand of the state of Tamil Nadu was that the agreements of 1892 and 1924 were in the nature of treaties with the crown. Around the time of independence, the Maharaja of Mysore executed the instrument of accession accepted by the Governor General in 1949. The Maharaja also executed a standstill agreement to continue all agreements and administrative arrangements as to matters of common concern existing between the Crown and the Indian states. They have been read many times for their meaning and effect. The Constitution of India commenced in 1950. The standstill agreement came to an end. Tamil Nadu maintained that the agreements of 1892 and 1924 continued in practice and that Mysore did not denounce them. After the States Reorganization Act 1956, Mysore became a new enlarged state with additional areas from 4 erstwhile states, including Madras. It was later called Karnataka. Whether the erstwhile Mysore obligations devolved on the new state was a subject of debate. It was asserted that Karnataka, a new state with much new areas, was not a successor state to the agreements of the erstwhile princely Mysore concerning the Kaveri waters. The striking feature, almost all these developments, the striking feature was this: sudden lapse of awareness. I am saying this, it's my interpretation. As though there was a sudden lapse of awareness on the part of Mysore. The princely state did not denounce the one-sided regime thrust upon it as agreement, initially on the merger of Mysore into the dominion of India by August 1947, or later on the commencement of the Constitution of India 1950, with Mysore becoming a Part B state, or even on the formation of the new state by 1956, placed on par as a state with Tamil Nadu. It complied with the agreement of 1924 in its different avatars through these landmark events until the concluding stages of 50 years approaching 1974. The realism of needs did not brook delay. During the 50s, the democratic government of the new state of Mysore was agitated by the urgency of projects across the tributaries Hemavati, Kabini, and Suvarnavati. Tamil Nadu would not facilitate. It was frustrating for Mysore getting involved in prolonged correspondence with Tamil Nadu for their consent. The center would not help resolve the conundrum. It would not provide clearance to the projects nor funds for their construction on the account of interstate dispute. Compelled by circumstances, Mysore had to undertake these projects with its own funds towards the end of 50s and the 60s in order to meet the growing needs in different areas served by tributaries. Finding the new state of Mysore, waking up, claiming its rights, overlooking the agreements, Tamil Nadu initiated action in law. It asserted the binding nature of agreements even on the new state. The procedure under the Interstate Water Disputes Act was invoked. Tamil Nadu lodged its complaint with the central government in 1970 for a tribunal to adjudicate the disputes. In 1971, Tamil Nadu approached the Supreme Court, attempting to restrain Mysore from the construction of projects on tributaries and seeking court directions for setting up the tribunal. The central government told the court that the year 1974, marking the conclusion of the agreement of 1924, was approaching. It was necessary to compile updated information to promote negotiations between the party states. The act required the center to attempt a negotiated settlement. The states concurred. Tamil Nadu withdrew the suit. The central government set up a Kaveri Fact-Finding Committee, CFFC, to collect the fresh data as also a committee headed by C.C. Patel to study and assess the scope for effecting savings in the use of Kaveri waters. What could be the savings? A committee had to be constituted ultimately for saving the utilization, use of waters. The reports of the CFFC and that of the C.C. Patel Committee by 1972-73, however, did not yield outcome. Tamil Nadu was not prepared to negotiate outside the 1924 agreement. Karnataka was not prepared to negotiate under the agreement. That was the stage to which we reached in 1972-73. We could assert, because we were a new state and a full-fledged state on par with Tamil Nadu. The central government, however, followed these reports in crafting an understanding. It's called draft understanding among the states at their meeting of August 1976 for the use of Kaveri waters. It suggested, center suggested, to divide the waters of 671 TMC, that is by reference to 75% dependability. That means that much water would be available in 75 years out of 100. It's called 75% dependability. 50% dependability means in 50 years out of 100. That was 740 TMC. With what was the understanding that was proposed by central government? With 489 for Tamil Nadu and 177 for Karnataka, because waters had been used and all economy had been developed. How could you suddenly curtail everything? So center said, we propose this, and 5 TMC for Kerala. States including Karnataka concurred, but not Tamil Nadu. On the hindsight, both of them appear to be unwise. Tamil Nadu was not content with 489. Karnataka was willing to accept 177 and to concede 489 to Tamil Nadu. Karnataka leaders may have found it wise in those circumstances, as it was the highest quantity ever achieved in Kaveri waters, and signed the draft understanding for 177. It was providential that Tamil Nadu's refusal, for its own reasons, however, saved the day for Karnataka. In retrospect, it may well be ironical to say that all is well that ends well. Tamil Nadu ultimately got reduced from 489 substantially by almost 100 TMC. Decades of perseverance have now yielded Karnataka with a much enlarged quantity of 285 TMC, with over 100 TMC additional, thanks since to the tribunal and the Supreme Court. In 1984, Tamil Nadu Riots Association moved the court to compel the central government to refer the disputes for adjudication. The government of Tamil Nadu supported the riots. It also lodged a fresh complaint in 1986 under the Interstate Water Disputes Act. The states continued negotiations with the mediation of the center, hoping for a solution even at that stage. Karnataka by then was completing the construction of its projects across the tributaries. The Supreme Court in 1990 directed the central government to set up a tribunal under the Act of 1956, comprising judges of the higher judiciary, to adjudicate disputes between the states. The central government, on 2nd June 1990, constituted the Kaveri Water Disputes Tribunal and referred the dispute described in the complaint of Tamil Nadu for adjudication. The adjudicatory approach of the tribunal may now be noted. We could not turn the chapter all of a sudden. All these developments were staring at the tribunal, comprising judges. They felt that Mysore can't just be brushed away by saying that they were overpowered. You had stalwarts in your ranks. You must have had all opportunities. You have also done with open eyes and all that. Those considerations were aired by Madras, and tribunal was also carried. Now, what was the adjudicatory approach prescribed by the tribunal? The tribunal did not spell out the parameters of the special enactment, the Interstate Water Disputes Act, within the constitutional framework of 262, Article 262 of the Constitution. The Act provided for the exclusion of jurisdiction of the Supreme Court too. The tribunal glossed over the initial statutory role of the central government to promote negotiated settlements among the conflicting states, as also in the final stage to shape the machinery for implementing the ultimate decision. That means central government has a role initially to bring about a negotiated settlement, and if not, if adjudication is brought about and if there is a decision, the machinery to implement the decision is also in the hands of the center. What happened? Tribunal just kept the center away. The tribunal did not appreciate the national perspective for river water uses. Neither the Act also did not help, nor the tribunal proceedings could accommodate any role for the central government to convey such considerations, notwithstanding the periodical announcements of national policy. We had to understand the center's policy through the national policy. Now, the experienced engineers, please note this also, there's another thing. The experienced engineers guiding the respective states were seen by the tribunal as among the clients. The tribunal ignored their possible purposeful contribution in resolving the dispute. After all, engineers are so important. In my experience, the first Krishna tribunal, headed by Justice Bachawat during the early 70s, alone spared time to interact with engineers from the states. The Bachawat tribunal succeeded in achieving numerous agreements between states. Proof of the pudding is in the eating, it is said. That award endured the full term of over 25 years without intervention by court proceedings. Now, how do proceedings proceed? Judges with court experience do what they do best, and they did. They leaned on the Code of Civil Procedure. Though the Act gave them more powers and access to procedures, including investigative powers, not limited to the code or confined to the adversarial approach. The two states were combatant all through. The proceedings were marked and marred by acrimony on every question at every stage. They sought court intervention many times at the drop of a hat, as though the proceedings protracted. The tribunal judges finally even displayed their differences inter se, apart from being at cross purposes with the assessors too. It dented the judicial harmony and candor. Yet, to our surprise, the tribunal composed a unanimous decision in 2007. After the loss of 17 years, they must have concurred that what would the countries say if we differ. So they brought about a unanimous decision. The tribunal handed its interim award in June 1991, directing Karnataka to ensure annual releases to Tamil Nadu of not less than 205 TMC. Even when the tribunal started, we were required to release 205 annually, notwithstanding all our efforts to progress. The irrigated area in Karnataka in the meanwhile was limited to 11.2 lakh acres. This much Madras had achieved even prior to 1924. But Tamil Nadu was not hurdled by any restrictions. Party states presented their statements of case before the tribunal. The main prayer of Tamil Nadu, by its statement of case, required the tribunal to declare the agreements of 1892 and 1924 permanent and binding on all parties. It sought a declaration that the said agreements still subsist and are in force. Tamil Nadu sought to enforce the pre-constitution agreements, as it were, by a decree for specific performance. They thought that the tribunal was a court intended to provide a decree for specific performance. It was not the case of Tamil Nadu that there should be equitable apportionment of waters between the disputing states. The prejudicial affectation or injury to the interests of the inhabitants of one state by the acts of the other is a precondition to maintain a complaint under the Act for adjudication of water disputes. That's what the Act says. The Kaveri dispute was ignited by Tamil Nadu. It was the sole complainant. No case of injury was made. Its sole case was for the enforcement of agreements. If anyone had suffered injury, it was Karnataka. Its injury, of course, was pervading its claim and case. We had to say it in defense, how injurious it had all been over the decades. Tamil Nadu did not deny the availability of 2 monsoons in its areas and of groundwater potential, though the extent and effective nature were the subject of contest. Tamil Nadu's groundwater potential exceeded 100 TMC, especially in the Delta region. Karnataka, on the other hand, firmly conveyed that the agreements of 1892 and 1924 were one-sided and unconscionable, brought about by pressures of the British power of paramountcy. There was no equal bargaining power between the two states. Karnataka's entire claim to irrigation was based on its in-basin needs, unlike Madras, which had taken water even outside the basin. Rainfall was undependable. Irrigation alone could be the panacea. Karnataka laid emphasis on the distribution of waters between the states based on the principles of equitable apportionment, as since approved by the Supreme Court, and not by the unenforceable pre-constitution agreements. Its aggregate claim, Karnataka's aggregate claim before the tribunal, was of the order of 465 TMC. With the tribunal sittings limited to 2 days a month, considerable time passed in recording evidence. At one stage, Karnataka, through the then Advocate General, suggested, should we talk to the judges and say that it should be more than 2 days a month? And I said, do it. And the tribunal judges did not, because Madras opposed that also. It ranged from the assessment of total yield. Now, coming to the nature of evidence. It ranged from the assessment of total yield of the river to the factors based on the principles of equitable apportionment and coordinating them with the previous utilizations made in areas of the two states and the needs now elaborated before the tribunal. The tribunal decided that the new state of Karnataka was a successor state under the various constitutional developments and finally under the States Reorganization Act of 1956, and that the agreements of 1892 and 1924 could be enforced by its decision. The tribunal said. The tribunal sidestepped the constitutional provision barring the jurisdiction of courts to interpret such agreements. Article 363 was held not applicable to its deliberations. A post-constitutional tribunal of special description under the Act was tasked to adjudicate and divide the waters of the Kaveri, an interstate river, in the interest of the region and national progress. But it vacillated between the needs of Karnataka, victimized over the years on the one hand, and the extravagant quantities received by Tamil Nadu on the other. It could not accommodate the principle that water must reach where most needed. It found it handy to favor the cliché of prior appropriation, though apparently achieved by Tamil Nadu, aided by agreements of doubtful law or logic. Thanks to the irrational and undefinable concept of British paramountcy, Karnataka, though a victim of many changes of administration, was considered a latecomer in the arena, using the jargon of water law to its disadvantage. It implied that Mysore and Karnataka people were not enterprising. The final award of the tribunal categorized the areas of irrigation by the touchstone of the agreements of 1892 and 1924. The report of the tribunal in 2007 held mainly, I'll just give the main findings. The tribunal said the total yield of the basin is 740 TMC and 75% dependability is about 650. Spelling out limitations in the assessment of groundwater resource, the tribunal assumed the available groundwater at least to an extent of 20 TMC in Tamil Nadu, available for use conjunctively with surface water in Delta region. Yet that was not distributed. The terms of the agreement of 1892 and 1924 have to be kept in view, said the tribunal, while considering the developments in different states vis-à-vis the share of the riparian states. In denying drinking water to the major portion of Bangalore city, the tribunal said, I quote, since 2/3 of Bangalore city lies outside the basin, we are considering drinking water requirement of Bangalore city for its portion of the areas which lies within the Kaveri basin, along with remaining basin area. The total requirement of Tamil Nadu was determined as 390 TMC for 24 lakh acres, including 10 TMC for reservoir losses. The total water requirement of Karnataka, providing irrigation to 18.85 lakh acres, was determined as 250 TMC. Final shares of the basin states were Kerala 30 TMC, Karnataka 270 TMC, Tamil Nadu 419 TMC, Pondicherry 7 TMC. Tamil Nadu was allocated 57% of water, whereas Karnataka was allocated 36.5%, though it is like just passing marks, 37, and 57 second class for Madras. Has larger drought areas, though Karnataka has larger drought areas than those in Tamil Nadu, apart from contributing the bulk of the water to the basin. The party states appealed to the Supreme Court by special leave. Apart from 17 years before the tribunal, the appeals had to wait for 10 more years for their final hearing in court. And maintainability was one of the questions. The appeals were held maintainable under Article 136 of the Constitution, upholding the supremacy of the Supreme Court over the orders of the tribunal. The Supreme Court heard the appeals on all aspects, from the agreements and their enforcement to the application of the principles of equitable apportionment. By its magnum opus of a pronouncement last year, February 2018, exceeding 400 pages, the court differed from the tribunal. It was of opinion that the agreement of 1924 expired in 1974 and could not be enforced. At last, we got it stated. The court said, taking into consideration the entire conspectus of facts and circumstances, we hold that the agreement expired after 50 years in the year 1974. Appreciating the record leading to the disputed agreements, as also the principles of equitable apportionment on all aspects of the water dispute, the court examined the report of the tribunal together with reasoning of the findings underlying its final decision. After a complete scrutiny of the voluminous evidence, the court exercised its power for a limited intervention. It extended its power to modify in favor of Karnataka to the extent of A, providing the drinking water to the whole city of Bangalore, and it said in very effective words, Bangalore, having attained a global status, developed into a progressively sophisticated, sprawling, vibrant, and much aspired seat of intellectual excellence, particularly in information technology and commercial flourish, and that it cannot be segregated, having an extricable composition and integrated whole for the purpose of requirements of its habitants. Approving the finding of the tribunal that Tamil Nadu had the benefit of groundwater potential in the quantity of 20 TMC, it was allocable between the two states to the extent of 10 each. The quantities were accounted and adjusted. Karnataka releases to Tamil Nadu were confined to 177, reducing it from 192. The verdict of the Supreme Court concludes the disputes for the time being, but it shall come up again for review before the court itself after a period of 15 years. And then it provided for the machinery. Now, Section 6A of the Act empowers the central government to formulate the scheme for implementation of the award. The Kaveri Tribunal had earlier expressed that for this purpose, I quote, for this purpose we recommend that Kaveri Management Board, on the lines of Bhakra Bias Management Board, may be constituted by the central government. In our opinion, the necessity of setting up a suitable mechanism is of utmost importance. Besides, whatever machinery is set up should be adequately empowered to implement the tribunal's decision, as otherwise we are afraid our decision would only be a piece of paper, unquote. Supreme Court in its turn directed the central government as follows. We direct that a scheme shall be framed by the central government within a span of 6 weeks from today, so that the authorities under the scheme can see to it that the present decision which has modified the award passed by the tribunal is smoothly made functional and rights of the states be determined. The court accepted this draft scheme as prepared by the center. And the corrected draft scheme is in consonance with the dictum and directions of the award as modified by this court, and also in conformity with Section 6A. The draft scheme ought to be taken up forward to its logical end in accordance with the law and utmost dispatch. The salient features of the scheme, it is elaborate. It has prescribed the powers and functions of the authority. Then all reservoirs to be operated in an integrated manner by the concerned state under the overall guidance of the authority for each 10-day period throughout the year, receive indents from party states for utilization of waters. Then the decision of the authority on all matters for the purpose of implementing the award of the tribunal as modified by the Supreme Court order shall be final. The scheme also provides for the establishment of the Regulation Committee with headquarters at Bangalore. The functions of the Regulation Committee. The Regulation Committee shall meet once in 10 days during the months of June to October, when the southwest and northeast monsoon set in. After the monsoon has set in, the meeting will be held at least once a fortnight. You see, currently exercises are on in respect of the present period, and that's the subject matter of these directions. Kaveri Water Disputes Tribunal has now been wound up. There is no forum to agitate any issue in case of dissatisfaction of either parties. In such a situation, the ultimate forum, being the Supreme Court, as a last resort, may be approached under Article 136 of the Constitution or by a suit under Article 131 there. Another alternative could be to approach the court under Article 32 at the instance of appropriate parties for implementation of the award as modified by the Supreme Court. The court may well direct any other modalities. Now, what has happened? The concept of water dispute connotes various attributes. The caption, dispute, may be misleading. It's a contest between the claimants to water use, to share the waters of a river system accessible to inhabitants. Our law has considered the state whose inhabitants access the water for various requirements as parens patria to espouse their cause. In such geographical situation, the contest is between the claimants' party states to share the waters of an interstate river. The tribunal is called upon to divide the waters proportionately with the help of the relevant factors for equitable apportionment. No one state can be wholly denied of waters, nor can anyone appropriate all waters. There can be no winner or loser in such a contest. Appropriate material is presented before the tribunal. Success or failure is a relative expression in the work of this magnitude. Where has Karnataka reached after 27 years before the tribunal and the court? To what extent has Karnataka overcome the denial suffered over 200 years? Questions continue to abound. Is this the end of the road? Maybe it is not. The decision will come up for review after 15 years as directed by the court. In the meanwhile, Tamil Nadu is contesting Karnataka's project at Mekedatu towards its drinking water potential while providing for regulated releases to Tamil Nadu. There are also other pending court proceedings instituted by Tamil Nadu. One of them seeks damages from Karnataka in astronomical figures by reference to delayed releases to Tamil Nadu in years of scarcity. Another complains of pollution caused in Karnataka areas, overlooking uncontrolled pollution from its own areas. Salem district dumps effluent from tannery, paper and textile units. Salem and Erode districts are assessed for their pollution to the river as of the highest level in the country. The disputes continue. What is the conclusion? The decision of the tribunal as modified by the Supreme Court has been more meaningful than the effect of awards of Justice Griffin or that of Justice Page in the previous century. It may not have been possible to completely undo the turmoil of Mysore for 200 long years. In my understanding, though, it appears substantially remedied. Karnataka would now have under its control an extent of 285 TMC or thereabouts, for its effective use being the highest ever. The releases of Kaveri waters from Karnataka to Tamil Nadu are minimized to 177, being the least ever. It may be recalled that there were times in the 19th century when enormous amount, almost the whole of the river, used to flow down to Madras, with hardly any resistance from Mysore for want of a storage in its area. Then I have related the various developments and how we have improved upon releases and in the quantity for our own use. Now it is 285 TMC, almost 300 TMC for Karnataka for its utilization. Besides, the drinking water component covers the whole of the city of Bangalore. These figures speak the extent of progress or success made over the constraints of the past. All in all, the judicial pronouncements of the apex court marks the conclusion of the dispute which had raged for long years. It rings the bell of quietus to the area of combative rivalry between the two states. I would, with the permission of my good friend Shankar, if he's still around, may I read your paragraph to conclude? It is stated, he says, I adopt his language. It is stated that hope sees the invincible, hope feels the intangible, and hope achieves the impossible. And in hope, we all live, and hope of the aspirations of the Delta farmers has not been belied by the adjudicating authorities, including the apex court. And thus it is more apt to put a quietus to the dispute and carry on with the farming with the fond hope that there will be abundant rain and water in the river Kaveri. Quiet and still flows the Kaveri, says Mr. Shankar. Now, if you permit me, I'll just take 5 minutes, 2 minutes for one part, 2 minutes for the other part. I want to thank so many people who have been associated. It would not be right. I have got the chance to say it in some corner of Karnataka in this historic place. So allow me to say that, if you don't mind. It must be stated that the government of Karnataka made all possible efforts accessing information, whether in India or at London or in other countries. The teams of engineers and lawyers had full support of the governmental agencies for articulating and projecting the just needs of Karnataka. Consistent stand of the state government across the political spectrum and party lines all along has had its rewards. There has been effective coordination with all advocates general during this period, from the senior-most B.V. Acharya to the recent incumbents Madhu Naik and Uday Holla, deserving full appreciation. The Inspirational Council, Fali Nariman, presently 91, has borne the burden of Karnataka identity with zest and dedication, leading the pack from 1984 till now. Among advocates since 1984, I have had the association of Mohan Katarki since 1990, known for his in-depth application to law and facts, presently a designated senior advocate. Eminent engineers of yesteryears, heading the WRDO group as chief engineers and advisors, to mention a few in the present context, could be the late S.G. Balekundri, the late B.C. Angadi, and the late A.V. Shankar Rao. Late S. Raghuram deserves a special mention, leading the army of WRDO engineers over the entire period, recalling their donkey work in the preparation of case. Those still around happily include R. Manu and Sri Ramaya, also officers of the previous era. The services of eminent consultants, also of the past era, may be recalled. The earliest was the opinion of Sir Binod C. Mitter in 1922 on the scope of the agreement of 1892 and that of arbitration thereunder. Mysore had the benefit of Sir Chimanlal Setalwad's service in the arbitration proceedings. After the formation of the larger state of Mysore, now Karnataka, they included the late Chief Justice V.S. Malimat, who, as the then Advocate General, advised during the construction of projects over the tributaries, as also the late Chief Justice E.S. Venkatramaya, who advised on the case, on the whole case of agreements. The state also availed the advice of the former Chief Justice M.N. Venkatachalaya and the opinion of the late Chief Justice R.S. Pathak at Delhi. Before concluding the presentation, I would like to recall, I'll skip that. I would only say it in Kannada like this. In the words of Kuvempu, Kaveri is a blessing to the region. A few words from the Nadagite. I would even add, Kaveri has been the cradle of civilization for the development of culture around. We are proud to be Kannadigas. Kuvempu's just 4 lines. Bharat jananiya tanujate, jaya he Karnataka mate, tailapa hoisalaralida nade, dankana jakanara nechina bide, Krishna Sharavati Tunga, Kaveriya Vararanga. This is the gift of Kaveri, gift of Krishna, gift of Sharavati. With your permission, I conclude. Thanks for your patient hearing.
For this brilliant and exhaustively researched lecture, I think we're very fortunate to have a practicing lawyer who has been in that litigation to give us such a scintillating lecture. A big round of applause for Shri Javali. Sir, may I kindly request you to light the lamp. Mr. Chandrasekhar to please come up on stage. Honor Mr. Sharad Javali. Sir, please.